Friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. And we're here with Huck, the executive producer of the show. And she's going to be here. Can you shake? Hey, can you shake? Shake? We're buddies, right? Yeah. Oh, she had a bath the other day, and she even likes it. She's so soft and clean, and it's awesome. So she's going to hang out with us today. Make sure I do everything right. Since this is Huck TV, we're going to try to do everything to her standards, which are, since we're a ragtag organization, I don't know if I can live up to what she needs, but we will try. Now, we're talking about two cases today from New York. And we're going to actually touch on three very briefly. But the first case has to do with a hunting guide. Now, I realize that many of you have never had any experience with guides, so I kind of want to lay some foundation for you. Guides are a pretty unique breed. They spend their life in the woods, and they're rated according to, number one, can they put you on fish or can they put you on big game? And number two, on their personality. Now, during my life, I've been very fortunate. My dad taught me something when I was pretty young. He said, Dave, when you go and you're going to spend a week at a new national forest that you've never been to, and you know that there's a lot of fish up there, you're going to spend a couple days trying to figure out where the fish are at, what they'll eat, what time they like to eat, etc. He said, don't waste your time. You'll just get frustrated. Best thing to do, find a fishing guide in that area, purchase a half day with him, and you will learn all you need to know, and you can have a great week of fishing. Well, along that line, when you're going blindly into a new area, back when my dad was around, we didn't have the internet, and guides weren't rated. Now they're rated, and so there's a little bit of insight as to who you're getting. I can remember, and I'll tell this, this isn't going to be a big story episode, but I just want to lay the groundwork. We were fishing up in Northern California, and we were steelhead fishing. And some friends of my dad's had said, hey, this guide is really good, so go with him. And about the first hour and a half in the trip, the man was the gruffest, toughest, worst language person you will ever imagine. If my mom had been on the trip, it would have been a train wreck. I was a young policeman. My dad was a fireman. The first stop we took was for lunch, and my dad and I kind of walked downstream a little bit, and he goes, can you believe this guy? I go, no, I can't. But that guy put me on a 24.5-pound steelhead. It was the biggest steelhead I ever caught in my life. And at the end of the day, he goes, hey, what are you going to do with it? I go, well, I think I'm going to have it mounted. It's so huge. He goes, yeah, if you don't, I'm going to buy it from you. I said, oh, okay. I did have it mounted. It's a huge fish. He said, you'll never catch a bigger steelhead than that. And he was right. I was probably 25 then. And I had never gone hunting with a hunting guide. But my dad had told me many stories about hunting guides, and that's where we're going on this story. Hunting guides need to know the wilderness they are hunting like you know your neighborhood, and even better. They need to know what's moving through the area. They need to know how big they are. They need to know the timing of it. They need to know to stay away from certain areas where other guides are taking patrons. And hunting guides can charge you a lot of money, thousands of dollars. I know a guide in Wyoming that charges $5,000 to take you onto a piece of property, and he will drive you around the property in a side-by-side until you find an animal you want to harvest. And if it's a trophy class animal, I couldn't believe this when I heard it. The tip for the guide is 10 grand. Well, Dave can't afford that. That's why I don't do it. But hunting guides are a different kind of breed. They have to be very confident. They have to worry about your safety. And that's a big deal. We'll talk more about their background in a few minutes. But this case is a brand new case that we found just the other day. It was a man named William Myers, 70, who went missing November 10th, 1950, in a place called Cranberry Lake, New York. He was a resident about 30 minutes away in a place called Star Lakes. Now, he was a 40-year hunting guide. I was trying to envision what this would be like. A 70-year-old man, pretty sharp, still going out hunting. So he wasn't all crippled up. He was moving pretty good. The amount of knowledge that's in that guy's head is unreal. Now, the area of this is Upper New York, kind of near Saranac Lake. I'll show you exactly where. Now, this is Lake Placid, New York. This is Tupper Lake. This is Cranberry Lake. This area right in here, there's nothing out there. This is all fairly flat. Very, very huge amounts of water, bogs, swamps, creeks, lakes. Everything is out here. But once you get out there, it's not that easy to move around. But there's a lot of wildlife. I'm going to get to this area in a second, but Cranberry Lake is where he was going. Now, driving miles between this and the next spot we're talking is 52 miles. Air miles, it's about 30. And really, I'm only concerned about air miles. But Cranberry Lake, 40-year hunting guide. Now, he had hunted this area of Cranberry Lake for his entire life almost. And he had fished this area in the summer, so he was in it all year. Now, he was going in to hunt. And he also had a hunting party that he was going in to meet. So the hunting party knew that William was coming in and was going to be there on the 10th. And when he didn't arrive, they called New York Conservation Department. And they got there right away. Now, the party that he was going to meet was his, and it was deep into the wilderness from Cranberry Lake. So the New York Natural Resources Department, which are the wardens for the state of New York, actually knew William. And they pulled out all the stops. They had 150 law enforcement officers, rangers, hunters, hunting guides, outfitters, all converge on Cranberry Lake during this time. Now, hunting guides and wardens have a special relationship. It's kind of love-hate. If you're a good, clean guide, personally, I would love the wardens. And they keep the poachers away. And poaching would kill the occupation of a hunting guide. Hunting guides also will tip off wardens to violators if they're a clean guide, because they can't handle poachers and such. Well, Natural Resources cared about William, knew that something huge must have happened, because nobody believed he'd get lost. So he had a good reputation. He was cared about. And when he became a hunting guide, they didn't have the testing that they have today. Now hunting guides have to pass a test They have to have insurance. They get their background vetted for experience because you have to have so many years as an apprentice. And it's different now than it was when William joined. But 150 searchers were on scene. And they brought in a plane that belonged to New York State Police. And they all converged on this area for a week. It's thick. It's lush. They had a big job ahead. Well, it was getting colder and colder, but they stayed on site, and by the end of the week, they had nothing. They couldn't find any tracks leaving his truck going towards the trailhead, even though they all figured he had to have gone towards this hunting party. He knew exactly where they were. They searched for a week, nothing. And at the end of that week, his family and friends and other hunters got together and went a second week at it. Now, hunters actually would make good search and rescue people, and here's why. Hunters are always looking at the ground as well as looking up. And why is that? Because they're looking for game tracks. Now, as a search and rescue person, you're always looking at the ground for human tracks. And sometimes you will know the kind of footprint that a missing person will leave behind, and you're looking for that on the ground. Well, game wardens were in disbelief that they weren't finding anything related to William. They didn't find his pack, they didn't find his gun, they didn't find anything he dropped, and they didn't find any tracks. And again, nobody in that entire group believed he was lost. So after 2 weeks, the search and rescue was terminated. Then in the spring of 1951, his family, friends, and other hunters got together and they tried to go out and look for his remains. Now, they waited until after that initial spring thaw when water goes way up in that area. So they waited for it to come down a little bit. They went in. They were positive they were going to find something. They found nothing. It is extremely rare in my world to find a guide or an outfitter that goes missing. I mean, it's really rare. There aren't many situations I can account for William disappearing. Here's why. He was following a trail out to a campsite where his people were at. If he had a medical emergency, he'd be right off that trail. The only thing that would account for something very odd is what I know about this area of New York. In 5 different books I've written, I've touched on this area at one time or another as we evolved and found different cases. This area of New York has a history of oddities. UFOs, Bigfoot, everything in between. Alien abductions even. The more I've learned about it, the more I've figured out that a lot of unusual things have gone on here. So, William Myers, 70 years old, missing May 10th, 1950. Now, when I go into an area and I start looking at it, when we found this case, I said, oh, wow. It's got to be another case I could talk about too. In fact, there's a couple. And case that I've known about for a long time involves a man named George Bombadier. Went missing November 29th, 1971, 21 years after William Myers. And he went missing from a small little city called Brighton, New York, just east of a city called Paul Smith's. Very close to a city called Vermontville. And why is that important? Well, I'm going to tell you. So, this is where Myers disappeared. This is where Bombadier disappeared. And this is where another case happened, Vermontville. Very close. Got it? So, Vermontville, not a big city, very, very small. Most of the homes are in a rural area of the community, spread out. Now, George Bombadier, the case we're going to talk to you about, happened in 71. That was 21 years after Myers. Well, 29 years after Bombadier, and in June of 2000, a husband and a wife, older couple, were in their home, a nice home. Husband was in the garage, wife was making dinner. Husband said he'd be back in like 20 minutes for dinner. Came back in the kitchen, wife was gone. Husband was stunned. Wife was 75 years old, had all of her faculties in good shape. He searched the house, walked around. He couldn't believe it. There's really no place for her to go. Dogs were still in the house. She's gone. Again, made no sense. Called the New York State Police. Police, of course, looked at him. Did you kill your wife? Did you dump her in the woods? Of course not. He was vetted and cleared, and they searched for a week and a half, and the lady was never found. The story's in Missing 411, The Devil's in the Detail. And why did I tell you that? If I put these three cases within 3 years of each other, law enforcement in that area is going to go, that's pretty weird. First person 70, next person 75. This is pretty odd. Well, but if I spread them out by 20, 30 years, everyone's going to retire, people move on, nobody remembers it. I've said this since I started this research. And that is what's happening here. So George Bombadier is hunting in an area where he's hunted almost his whole life. He's retired. He's 70 years old, a lifetime hunter. He retired from the Rouse Point and Delaware Railroad Company. And he owned a deer hunting camp just east of Paul Smith's, the city, almost to Brighton. So Brighton is just east of Paul Smith's, right over in here. Kind of on the way to Rainbow Lakes, but not quite. Kind of in between Paul Smith's and Vermontville, as a matter of fact. That's where he disappears. In an area very similar to Cranberry Lakes. Tons of water, very lush, thick, great hunting. Great hunting, remember that. And that's why George bought a hunting camp there decades earlier. Hundreds of small bodies of water in that area if you look on Google Earth. The New York State game wardens came in, started talking to the family, said, okay, so George was going to go out hunting just one day, November 29th, 1971. He was going to go hunt, and he said he'd be back that night. Well, late that night, he didn't come back, so then they call the state game wardens. The next morning, they come back to the family, get the resources together, and they start to work a profile up on George. They stated that he was not in perfect health. He took daily medication for a blood disorder. But they also stated that they thought it was impossible that he was lost. Sound familiar? Kind of like William Myers, right? And the reason they said that is because George had owned this exact piece of land for decades and decades. And he had hunted the area before he owned it. And he told his family that he'd be back by dark. Well, he didn't come back. That had never happened before. So the wardens decide that on November 30th, they're going to call in as many as they can, other wardens and state police from the area, and they get 25 to respond. It was cold, snowy, and the wardens didn't have any planes at that point, so they have to go and they pound the ground with their feet. Later in the day, and later in the search, New York State Police helicopter was able to come in there on December 1st and 2nd and flew for 16 hours throughout that area looking for George. Again, lush, thick woods, fairly flat, a lot of ponds, a lot of bogs, but the trails were readily identifiable. The game wardens called Adirondack Search and Rescue Team, and they brought out 25 members also that said that they had searched for a week. We come back to that issue of searchers like you and me being able to take off from work and commit to searching. And then if they're an hour, 2 hours away from home, that's a lot of daily commuting to get home and get in bed. And usually searchers have a very early start. They usually start at 6 a.m. and they usually stay on the ground till 4 or 5 p.m. And when you're driving home after searching and climbing all over mountains all day, you're pretty darn tired. And the state does not pay you for what you do, and the state does not pay for your lodging or food. Search and rescue people are great people. Think about joining if you can. So there's a 2-week search for George Bombadier. They know the area he's in. He knows the area he's in. They call in his friends who have hunted that area with him on his property, and they were helping point out to game wardens where he liked to hunt. Nothing. So after 2 weeks, his family was disappointed. His wife was really bummed. And then they had to call it off. Snow kept falling. Winter came in hard. Then in May 1972, there were several newspaper articles that interviewed George's wife. And she explained to them that they were going to come in and on one weekend just inundate the area on a grid search to see if they could find George's remains. They felt that they'd at least find his backpack, his rifle, etc. So after 2 days, they found nothing. So multiple searches, multiple weeks, different seasons, still not finding anything. So they have the wife sit down and they say, well, what do you think happened? And she said, well, for starters, nobody believes that George is lost. Well, sounds very similar to the statement about William Myers, doesn't it? Both men, right around 70 years old, both men considered expert hunters. Both men knew the area that they disappeared in like you know your own neighborhood. Both men extremely experienced hunters. Both men traveling alone. On one of my recent videos, I saw two people had posted comments, and both stated that they had gotten personal locator beacons for their family members that hunt. Thank you. Thank you. Both of these men possibly could have been found if they were carrying PLBs. And as I've stated on many other segments, nobody I know of ever expected to disappear. In fact, the vast majority of the people, especially hunters, they're all a lot of testosterone. I'm a tough hunter. I'm never going to get lost. Well, you may not. But what if you fell down and broke your leg in a bog? Yeah. And if you fall into a bog in the beginning of winter, you can freeze to death pretty quickly. Even if you get out of that bog, you can freeze to death very quickly. So Having a PLB, knowing that search and rescue can find you within 10 feet of that signal, it's a very comforting thought, in my humble opinion. So, these two men never found. And in fact, the woman from Vermontville, there was a massive, massive search. They did a background on her husband. They did talk to neighbors about the family. Loving family. They talked to the kids in the family. Loving family. There was never any insinuation that the husband may have been involved. They brought canines to the scene. They didn't track anything moving away from the property. Where did she go? Every once in a while on these videos, I'll get comments and I'll go, well, you know, people disappear, Dave. That's just the way it is. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Sometimes I don't know whether to just dump the comments and ignore the people or to spend the time and educate them. What I usually do is, this is a much more state something like, this is a much more complex issue than one video could explain. And I'd encourage you to go to your local library and get my books. And if the library doesn't have the books, ask for an interlibrary transfer, and they usually can get the books. And as a last resort, you can get a hold of my books at our website, NA, like North America, nabigfootsearch.com. So, that is the incidents for today. 2 hunters and 1 woman. That other story about the woman's in Missing 411, the devil's in the detail. One of the other stories, the story about George Bombadier, is in Missing 411 Hunters. And since we are on the verge of hunting season beginning to explode, I'll say it one more time. If you're a family member of a hunter, please get him a personal locator beacon. I don't get anything from it. I don't represent them. But I'm just saying, there's going to be 3 or 4 hunters that disappear this year. There always is. And I guarantee not one of those people thought it would happen to them. Thank you for being here. Please post this on your social media, especially since hunting season's coming. And when you get out in the world, remember to be kind to your neighbors and your friends and your acquaintances and even the people you see in the store. Just be nice to people. We need more people being polite. Paulides out.